Well, again, hello everyone. Thanks so much for being here today. This is a big change for the Iowa Wild. Bringing in a coach, Greg Cronin, with the vast experience he has, not only in coaching but also in player development. We're looking for our prospects to take big steps, and we believe Greg is the guy to lead the charge. So I'd like to welcome Greg Cronin to the podium now, please.
Okay. I'm blessed to have an opportunity to go back into the AHL. This will be my 8th year coaching in the league. I started out in Bridgeport in 2003. As Matt pointed out back then, hockey hadn't evolved into a sport where there's this entourage of staff that follow the team around. The player development model was way different. I went back into the American League in 2018 after I was an associate head coach with the Islanders, New York Islanders, and really was my first introduction to watching really like modern sports utilize people to strengthen development. So you have development coaches, strength coaches, analytical personnel. I think we're going to do our best job to maximize that staff so that our players can get a great experience developing at this level. So are there any questions?
Can we just fire them off?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think of Iowa so far?
Well, I've actually been here before. I was in college hockey back in the late 80s, I think I was here. They used to have the Buck Bowl, which is a preseason USHL tournament. So I'm somewhat familiar with the city. When I was coaching in Colorado, we played here, I think, 2 or 3 times. So I was here in the winter time. And when I drove back from Colorado to Boston, I'd always stop in this area, whether it was Iowa City or just outside of Des Moines on the ride back. That was the last stop in my leg back to Colorado.
What are your thoughts?
Midwestern town. I mean, it's so different. Like, it's funny, like, and I mean this like personally because, I grew up on the East Coast. I'm a Boston guy, and I think I've seen more people say hello and be friendly in 24 hours here than I saw in 24 days in Boston, right? Like, the East Coast has got a little bit of a rougher, kind of a fast-paced lifestyle, and I think people are more grounded. There's a little bit of a humble lifestyle here that comes out in the way people treat each other. So it's actually really nice. I think that's why they call it the Heartland. So I'm looking forward to it.
The accent it's thick. It's definitely thick.
Yeah.
What do you think about coming here to Iowa, coming back into the AHL? Can you tell us about your coaching style?
Yeah, like I said earlier, in my introduction, the American League has really evolved into a critical league for the NHL. With the salary cap and the salaries going up, if you can develop young players and they can come in there and play a role in the NHL club, I think it's a really salary friendly transition. Our job is to create some visibility for the players individually and then allow that visibility to translate into I think a fairly reliable trajectory for the organization. When I was in Colorado, we saw Rossi come through here and Boldy, and I'm sure there's a few other guys that Tim Army coached that are now playing real vital roles for the Minnesota Wild, and that's what our job is going to be here in the next couple of years.
How do you think that winning affects personal player development?
It's a huge part of it, and I don't think any NHL or AHL GMs are going to say we just want to develop. We don't care about winning. They all say it, but it's hard to do. Like, half the teams don't have winning records every year, right? So the winning part of it's critical because when the players go to the rink and they're winning, they feel good about themselves. It creates good energy. There's a goal at the end of the year, and when you slide out of the playoffs early, it becomes kind of a heavy march to the finish line. And we want to make sure that we're not in that situation this year.
How personal do you take losses?
As I've gotten older, I've taken them more as learning experiences and less personal. It's funny, I got hired to go to Anaheim out of Colorado because of the development model that we established in Colorado. It was very predictable. I shared this with Matt and the staff when I went through the interview process. We had 30 players go through the Colorado Eagles in 5 years, make it to the NHL. And that's hard to do when the Avalanche were, annual Stanley Cup contenders, right? They weren't just playoff team, they were a Stanley Cup team. So the amount of spots for those guys was limited. So I think our process was able to create a pathway for those players to get into the NHL, whether it was through the Avalanche, whether it was like a Logan O'Connor, who came through as an undrafted free agent. Pavel Francouz was an undrafted free agent. They played on that Stanley Cup team. And then now recently, A.J. Greer was with us, and he found his way into Florida this year and won a Stanley Cup. So, I think that pedigree in terms of developing is a reflection of the process that we're going to create here. And when we went to Anaheim, we used the same process there. It was a very unusual situation. There were 11 guys that were born in 2000 that played significant time there. And the top of that would be Leo Carlson, who obviously I think is going to be a superstar. And like maybe a lesser known guy that worked their way in last year would be a Sam Colangelo or a Nikita Nestorenko. Those guys were AHL products that went through San Diego and worked their way up. So ideally, we're creating that same, dynamic here, and I'm looking forward to getting after it.
You were in the NHL before. What experience can you take from those 2 years there that you can bring here?
Well, and these are you could have been in the interview process because they were asked during that too, right? So like they asked about that, and I think I have an advantage that I've spent the last 2 years as an NHL head coach, and then so my experience in the AHL clearly can speak to the roots, the grassroots level of development, and being in the boots in the ground with that, and then being an NHL head coach the last year, I can see the product of that, and I can speak to how that process transfers into the NHL. And I think any AHL player, when they talk to a coach that's coaching him in the AHL that just spent 2 years in the NHL I think, Mason McTavish is going to be a star, Leo Carlson is going to be a star, Lacombe's going to be a star, Dostal is going to be a star. Like when I'm a critical part of that process into the NHL, that just creates more credibility for me and the staff here.
What's your headshot's a little intimidating.
Where'd they come up with that, for God's sakes? It looks like somebody stunned me there. I was in shock mode. God.
What's your personality like, with that being said?
Well, I actually have a good sense of humor, as you can say, because it's self-deprecating humor. I'm glad you brought that up. God, I saw that picture. I was like, whoa, this guy just got hit with a cattle prod, So, they kind of, I come out as kind of an intense guy, and like somebody said to me, I can't change my face. I was actually talking to John Hines about this, because Heinze's got he's kind of got a tough demeanor, right? The facade of Heinze, he's like no nonsense guy, and I think I smile more than Heinze does, but like I have an intensity to me that I would say is more of a passion. I'm very honest. When I do talk to players, I try to be honest, transparent with my behavior, and also compassionate. I think the generation today, the kids are a little bit more complicated. I don't have kids, so I wasn't going through that process with kids, but I think kids today, they need more one-on-one time, whether I like it or not. And there is a negotiation with kids today. When I was coaching back in the late 90s in the NHL, there was a black and white world. You did it, and you followed direction. You trusted your coaches and your teachers and your mentors. And now today, I think with the social media and the number of agents involved, and I think the kids have alternative information sources, and they can use that, to compare it to what you're saying. So you're not changing that. So you've got to respect that process, and you've got to, try and honor the kid's view of the world, and try and, bridge a gap between what you think he can do and what he's not doing. Because I think, like ultimately, when you're trying to push people through these glass ceilings, there's some pain involved. And I think as a coach, you have to have the conviction that your message is going to really help this kid get to another level. And, I think that's one of my biggest strengths as a coach. And sometimes you get some flack for that. But I'm willing to take the flack to push through it and see the kid get to another level.
What are some of your short-term goals?
Short-term goals to make the playoffs, and obviously try and, get these younger players that I think that are kind of earmarked for the Minnesota Wild, get them more prepared for that.
What makes you think you can turn around this team?
Well, I'm going to be very honest with you, right? You need good players, okay? So I'm not putting any pressure on Matt and the staff, but you need to have good players to win. If the players aren't that good, it takes more time to develop them. And I don't know the league that well. I wasn't on this side. We were on the west side, so I knew a lot of the teams out west in San Diego and Ontario. But like I said before, I think the process that I've been using for 2 decades here, in terms of creating transparency and having the players committed to playing a certain way, will give us some visibility on how these kids will evolve. But the mystery is, when do they figure it out? And you go back to the Anaheim Ducks, some of those guys took longer than we thought they would take. And you can take all the sports science you want, all the psychology you want. We don't have a measurement to measure somebody's emotional and mental maturity. And that's part of it, right? So, but I do think if you're consistent with your messaging and they trust the message, they will accelerate their development. So, in a perfect world, we get some good players here. And Matt and I have talked about that, in a rating system, what I think good players are and what they produce offensively. Ultimately, you got to have, when you look at plus minuses, you can have a lot of scores, but if they're minus double digits, you're not going to win a lot. And I just, last year, being respectful to the coaching staff, they had a similar problem we did in Anaheim. They had poor special teams. So one way to close that gap is just to improve your power play and your penalty kill. You should have done the interview when I was sitting down with Matt and the staff there.
I'm not clear, unfortunately. Yeah, hammering them at you.
Okay. All good?
Yeah.
Okay.